In this video, we are going to talk about reactions to failure and you understanding your reactions to failure. As a leader, your reaction to failure matters. It really makes all the difference. How you respond to bad news is hugely critical to the ability of your organization to learn and to make a difference going forward, or to hide in cultures of risk secrecy where you learn nothing, where there's underreporting and people don't trust you with bad news. The word on the street is this: a safety culture is a culture that allows you, the leader, to hear bad news. Is bad news safe with you? Can you hear bad news? Or do people not trust you? Your reaction to bad news makes all the difference. Now, what we see in the research and in practice is that reactions to bad news that are counterproductive are typically reactions that are counterfactual, judgmental, proximal, retrospective. And let me talk about that briefly. You don't have to remember those words, but you probably recognize the outlines of what it means as I talk about it. Your reaction to failure typically initially focuses on the person who was closest to the action and the failure at the time, the caregiver through whose hands the care ultimately flowed. They didn't do something that they should have done. They could have done something that they didn't do. If only they had looked more closely at this. If only they had considered this little piece of data, then they would have recognized the situation was X versus Y. This is how we tend to think about it. If only they had followed the rule, the procedure, the guideline, didn't do this workaround, then it would have happened in a different way. All of that is being smart in hindsight. None of it explains anything, and none of it helps you to deal with the failure or deal with the persons involved in it. What you want to do as a leader when you are confronted by a failure, by bad news, is to consider it as a stress test. A stress test for yourself and for your organization. It's a stress test in at least two ways, and probably more. First of all, think about it as a stress test for how bad it could have been. Could it have got any worse? When you get bad news, when you get evidence from an incident, ask yourself this, ask other people this: could it have got worse? If the answer is yes, then part of your organization and your people and you survived the stress test because it didn't get worse. What is it that they did to stop the progression, to not let it get out of hand even further? When you recognize that, there's something to celebrate. There's something to get together around and say, hey, we did that well. Yes, we were on the way to a pretty bad thing, but we stopped it. It could have got worse, and it didn't. Celebrate that, learn from it, broadcast it, so that your organization emerges even more strongly. But it's a stress test also for you as a leader. Are you the leader that can deal with bad news? Because that's the leader that creates a safety culture. Are you the leader who's able to show compassion, who engages in listening, who shows understanding? There's a very important thing to remember whenever you are confronted with bad news. People did not come to work to do a bad job. You have to acknowledge that, because otherwise, why did you hire them to begin with? Why did you train them? Why did you supervise them? Why did you promote them? If they come to work to do a bad job, they don't come to work to do a bad job. What people do makes sense to them, given their goals, given their knowledge, given their information, given their focus of attention, all of which you help determine as a leader because you set the conditions for their work. If it makes sense to them, it makes sense for other people. And so try to understand and show compassion for how these circumstances configure people in a landscape of bad choices where they can't do it right. For you as a leader, think about it this way. When you are confronted by bad news, don't feel that you need to act immediately, because you don't. And if you do act immediately, you probably regret it later. So when you hear bad news, do this. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the bad news, because your organization will get better for it.